Lieutenant Commander Ryan Torres had been working alongside Sentinel for 3 months, and he was no closer to solving the mystery of his enigmatic partner than he'd been on the day the armored figure had first stepped aboard the exploration vessel Meridian. Standing nearly 2 meters tall in combat armor that looked like it had been forged by angels with advanced degrees in intimidation, Sentinel communicated exclusively through a voice modulator that rendered their speech in the kind of neutral, synthesized tones usually reserved for automated customer service systems with delusions of military grandeur. Target analysis complete, Sentinel announced during their morning tactical briefing, their electronic voice carrying the emotional range of a microwave oven announcing that dinner was ready. Hostile probability, minimal. Recommended approach, standard reconnaissance with elevated caution protocols. Ryan studied the holographic displays showing their next exploration target. A previously uncharted system that had been flagged for investigation by deep space sensors. Agreed. Though I have to ask, do you ever have opinions about these missions that aren't filtered through tactical probability matrices? Clarification requested, Sentinel replied, their helmeted head tilting with mechanical precision that somehow managed to convey confusion despite the complete absence of visible facial expressions. I mean, do you ever look at a planet and think that looks interesting or I wonder what lives there, without immediately calculating threat assessments and defensive strategies? Sentinel paused for several seconds, a delay that Ryan had learned usually indicated they were processing concepts that didn't fit into standard military frameworks. Curiosity is a luxury that becomes available after survival parameters are satisfied, they said finally. Interesting planets remain interesting only if they do not kill the observers. Ryan laughed, a sound that had become more frequent during their briefings as he'd grown accustomed to Sentinel's peculiar combination of lethal competence and what appeared to be a completely literal interpretation of everything. Fair point. Though I notice you do seem to have preferences, even if you express them through tactical recommendations. Preferences? You always suggest approaches that minimize environmental damage and avoid disturbing indigenous life forms when possible. That's not standard military doctrine, that's personal philosophy. Another pause, longer this time, as if Sentinel was considering whether personal philosophy was a legitimate topic for tactical discussion. Efficient operations preserve resources and minimize complications, they said, but Ryan detected something in their electronic voice that suggested the explanation was incomplete. Over 3 months of partnership, Ryan had developed a growing appreciation for Sentinel's tactical expertise, which exceeded anything in standard human military training. Their combat techniques were fluid, precise, and demonstrated an understanding of three-dimensional battlefield dynamics that suggested either extensive experience or natural intuition that couldn't be taught through conventional methods. Sentinel, Ryan said, studying their partner's imposing figure and feeling the familiar curiosity that had been growing stronger with each mission, can I ask you something personal? Define personal. Something about you that isn't related to tactical assessment or mission parameters. Sentinel's armored form went completely still, a reaction that Ryan had learned indicated either deep thought or system malfunction. After nearly a minute of silence, they responded with what sounded like carefully chosen words. Personal questions create interpersonal complications that may interfere with operational efficiency. Or they create interpersonal connections that improve operational efficiency through enhanced trust and communication, Ryan countered, realizing he was debating philosophy with someone whose face he'd never seen and whose voice he'd never heard without electronic modification. Interpersonal connections. Sentinel repeated, their voice modulator adding electronic distortion to what might have been thoughtful consideration. This concept requires additional analysis. Ryan found himself smiling at the response, understanding that Sentinel's apparent unfamiliarity with personal relationships was either genuine alien cultural difference or an incredibly elaborate performance designed to maintain distance from their human colleagues. Either explanation raised interesting questions about their partner's background and motivations. How about this, Ryan suggested, next time we're planet-side together, I'll show you some non-tactical ways to appreciate interesting environments, and you can decide whether curiosity is worth the luxury of reduced threat assessment. This proposal has merit, Sentinel agreed, their electronic voice carrying what might have been approval. Field testing of alternative observational methodologies could provide valuable data for future operational optimization. I'm going to interpret that as, yes, I'd like to try looking at pretty things without immediately figuring out how they could kill us, Ryan said, noting that Sentinel's head movements seemed to become more animated when they were engaged in conversation rather than conducting formal briefings. Interpretation acknowledged, Sentinel replied, and Ryan could swear their voice modulator carried a note of something that might have been humor if it hadn't been completely electronic. Their tactical planning session continued with the usual efficiency that had made them the ship's most effective exploration team, but Ryan found himself paying attention to details he'd previously overlooked. Sentinel's armor made subtle adjustments throughout their discussion, shifts in posture and positioning that suggested comfort rather than mere functionality. Their tactical recommendations showed creativity and intuition that seemed at odds with the rigid military persona their appearance suggested. Mission parameters established, Sentinel announced as they concluded their briefing. Departure scheduled for 0800 tomorrow. Recommended preparation includes standard equipment loadout plus additional environmental analysis tools for expanded observational methodology testing. You mean the pretty thing-looking equipment, Ryan translated with amusement. Terminology is semantically equivalent, Sentinel agreed, their electronic voice managing to convey what might have been embarrassment if their vocabulary included concepts like embarrassment. As Sentinel prepared to leave the briefing room, Ryan noticed something that made him pause. Their movement through the doorway required a slight adjustment that seemed designed to accommodate physical proportions that didn't quite match his mental image of the imposing warrior he'd been working with. The change was subtle, barely noticeable unless someone was specifically observing for inconsistencies, but it suggested that Sentinel's armor might be compensating for a physical form that differed from its external appearance. Sentinel, Ryan called as they reached the corridor. Query. Tomorrow's mission, are you looking forward to it? Another pause, shorter this time but somehow more significant. Forward anticipation is not a standard operational parameter, Sentinel said carefully. However, the prospect of expanded observational methodology presents interesting possibilities. Ryan watched their armored figure disappear down the corridor, understanding that something about that response had been more personal than any of their previous interactions. The electronic distortion couldn't quite mask what had sounded like genuine enthusiasm beneath the mechanical precision of their speech. Interesting possibilities, Ryan repeated to himself, realizing that his curiosity about Sentinel had evolved beyond professional interest into something more personal than he'd expected. Working with someone whose identity remained completely concealed had created a unique form of attraction based entirely on personality, competence, and the growing sense that beneath the intimidating exterior was someone worth knowing. The thought troubled him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. His developing feelings for his enigmatic partner were complicated by the complete absence of information about their species, gender, or even basic physical characteristics. Yet somehow, those feelings continued to grow stronger with each mission, each conversation, and each glimpse of personality that managed to emerge through the electronic barrier of their voice modulator. This is either going to be the beginning of a beautiful friendship, Ryan said to the empty briefing room, or the most complicated case of mistaken identity in interstellar history. Either way, tomorrow's mission was promising to be more interesting than usual, and not just because of the unexplored planet they'd be investigating. For the first time since Sentinel had joined their crew, Ryan felt like he might have the opportunity to learn something about the person behind the armor. Assuming there was actually a person behind the armor rather than just very sophisticated artificial intelligence with boundary issues. Interesting possibilities, he said again, and headed to his quarters to prepare for what he suspected would be a mission that answered some questions while raising entirely new ones about his mysterious partner and his own unexpected feelings for someone whose identity remained one of the galaxy's more intriguing unsolved mysteries. The exploration of Kepler 438c had been proceeding according to standard protocols until the moment when their shuttle was swallowed by what could charitably be described as the planet's most aggressive geological feature and more accurately described as a canyon system with serious abandonment issues. Ryan found himself trapped underground with Sentinel for what their emergency beacon estimated would be a 3-day rescue operation, assuming the rescue team could locate them beneath several hundred meters of rock that had recently decided to rearrange itself without consulting any engineering specifications. Well, Ryan said, examining their collapsed cave system with the philosophical acceptance of someone whose career had included numerous experiences with hostile geology, this is either going to be a great opportunity for extended tactical planning or the most awkward survival situation in the history of interstellar exploration. Current circumstances present optimal conditions for expanded observational methodology testing, Sentinel replied through their voice modulator, though Ryan noticed their electronic voice carried what might have been nervous energy beneath its usual mechanical precision. Environmental constraints eliminate external tactical considerations, allowing focus on immediate survival parameters and secondary objectives. Secondary objectives being the pretty thing looking we discussed yesterday. Affirmative, Sentinel agreed, but their response came with physical movements that seemed less mechanically precise than usual. Their armor's posture adjustments looked almost fidgety, if armored warriors were capable of fidgeting. Over the next several hours, as they established their survival protocols and waited for rescue, Ryan began noticing details about Sentinel that contradicted his assumptions about their identity. The armor made regular micro-adjustments that seemed designed to accommodate physical characteristics he couldn't see, but the pattern suggested proportions that didn't match his mental image of the imposing warrior he'd been working with. Sentinel, Ryan said as they shared their emergency rations, "Can I ask you about your armor? It's obviously advanced technology, but it seems to do more than just protection and enhancement." Clarification requested, Sentinel replied, though their voice modulator seemed to add extra electronic distortion to the response, as if they were manually adjusting something. It makes constant adjustments that look like comfort modifications rather than tactical optimization. Like it's designed to accommodate someone whose natural form is different from its external appearance. Sentinel went completely still for nearly 2 minutes, a silence that stretched long enough for Ryan to wonder if he'd accidentally asked something deeply personal or potentially offensive. When they finally responded, their voice carried carefully chosen words that seemed to weigh each syllable for potential implications. Advanced armor systems provide comprehensive environmental adaptation, they said slowly. Optimal performance requires precise calibration to operator specifications that may not be immediately apparent to external observers. So your armor is customized for your specific physiology? All advanced armor systems require customization, Sentinel replied, but Ryan detected what sounded like evasion in their electronic voice. Generic configurations are inefficient for specialized operational requirements. Ryan studied his partner's armored form, noting subtle details he'd previously overlooked. The armor's proportions suggested someone smaller and more agile than its imposing appearance indicated. The movement patterns showed flexibility and grace that seemed at odds with heavy combat armor, and the tactical preferences consistently favored approaches that required finesse rather than brute force. Sentinel, Ryan said carefully, "I'm beginning to think I've made some incorrect assumptions about you." Assumptions are frequently inaccurate, Sentinel agreed, their voice modulator failing to mask what sounded like nervousness. Direct observation provides more reliable data than theoretical extrapolation. Then let me observe directly, Ryan said, surprised by his own boldness. What am I missing about who you are? The silence that followed was different from Sentinel's usual processing pauses, it felt charged with decision-making and internal conflict that had nothing to do with tactical analysis. When they finally moved, it was to adjust their armor's posture in ways that seemed almost defensive. Personal identity disclosure presents complications, Sentinel said, their electronic voice carrying what might have been regret. Previous experience suggests that human responses to certain revelations can negatively impact operational relationships. Ryan felt something shift in his understanding of their conversation, realizing that Sentinel's concealment wasn't just cultural tradition or security protocol, it was protective measure based on actual experience with human prejudice or assumption. Sentinel, he said gently, whatever you think might change my opinion of you, I can promise that 3 months of working together has given me a pretty solid foundation of respect and other feelings that aren't going to disappear because of new information. Other feelings? Sentinel's voice modulator added extra electronic distortion to the question, as if they were having technical difficulties or emotional responses that affected their equipment. Ryan realized he'd inadvertently admitted to feelings he hadn't entirely processed himself, creating a moment of honesty that was either going to improve their partnership or make their survival situation significantly more awkward. "I think I've been developing feelings for you that go beyond professional partnership," he said, understanding that 3 days trapped underground was either going to resolve the tension that had been building between them or create new complications that would make future missions impossible. "Which is complicated because I know basically nothing about who you actually are beneath that armor." Sentinel's armored form went through a series of adjustments that looked like someone experiencing emotional responses that their equipment wasn't designed to accommodate. Their voice modulator produced sounds that might have been attempts at speech before finally managing a coherent response. Emotional complications were anticipated, they said, their electronic voice carrying what sounded like carefully suppressed feelings. Human attachment formation is well documented in interspecies psychological literature. However, theoretical knowledge does not adequately prepare for practical experience of reciprocal emotional development. Reciprocal? Ryan asked, understanding that Sentinel had just admitted to having feelings for him while simultaneously revealing that they'd been researching human psychology in ways that suggested significant personal interest. "Affirmative," Sentinel said quietly, their voice modulator failing to mask what was definitely emotional vulnerability. "Emotional attachment has developed despite logical awareness that identity revelation could terminate positive relationship dynamics." Ryan looked at his armored partner, understanding that they were both admitting to feelings complicated by mystery, assumption, and the fear that truth might destroy what they'd found together. The survival situation had stripped away professional distance and forced honesty that might not have emerged under normal circumstances. "Sentinel," Ryan said, moving closer despite the awkwardness of trying to have an intimate conversation with someone in full combat armor, "what if identity revelation doesn't terminate anything? What if it just changes the context of what we already have?" "Statistical probability suggests negative outcomes," Sentinel replied, but their armor's posture adjustment suggested they wanted to believe otherwise. "Statistics don't account for the fact that I've been falling for your personality for 3 months, Ryan said, surprised by his own honesty. "Whatever physical form that personality inhabits isn't going to change how I feel about the person I've gotten to know." Sentinel's voice modulator produced what might have been a sigh if electronic systems were capable of sighing. Previous experience with human responses to Kithara physiology suggests otherwise. "Kithara?" Ryan said, processing this first concrete information about Sentinel's species. "You're Kithara. That explains the tactical expertise and the weight Kithara are known for being." "For being female," Sentinel interrupted, their voice modulator adding electronic distortion to what was obviously a significant revelation. "For being considered attractive by humans in ways that create objectification rather than respect. For being assumed to be decorative rather than competent." Ryan stared at Sentinel's armored form, understanding flooding through him as numerous small details suddenly made sense. The armor's proportions, the movement patterns, the tactical preferences, the careful word choices, all of it fitted together into a picture he should have recognized sooner if he hadn't been blinded by assumptions about armor and warrior identity. "You're female," he said, not as a question but as recognition of truth that recontextualized their entire relationship. "Affirmative," Sentinel replied, their electronic voice carrying what might have been relief at finally acknowledging what they'd been concealing. "Identity confirmed. Female Kithara tactical specialist operating under concealment protocols to avoid prejudicial treatment by human personnel." Ryan processed this information while looking at his partner with completely new understanding, realizing that his developing feelings now had context he hadn't expected but that somehow felt exactly right. "Well," he said finally, "this certainly makes our survival situation more interesting." "Interesting how?" Sentinel asked, their voice modulator failing to mask obvious nervousness about his reaction. "Interesting because now I know that the person I've been falling for is even more remarkable than I thought," Ryan said, moving closer to his armored partner. "And because I'm really curious about what you look like when you're not disguised as an intimidating warrior." Sentinel's armor made adjustment sounds that definitely indicated emotional responses affecting equipment designed for tactical operations rather than intimate conversations. Curiosity satisfaction may present additional complications, she said, her voice modulator's electronic distortion unable to mask the feminine qualities that Ryan now realized he'd been hearing all along. The crisis began 18 hours into their underground survival ordeal when Sentinel's voice modulator started producing sounds that resembled a dying electronic animal having philosophical disagreements with a broken synthesizer. What had been merely technical difficulties with emotional expression became genuine equipment failure that threatened both her concealment and their communication capabilities. Modulator malfunction detected, Sentinel announced, her electronic voice now interspersed with static bursts and frequency fluctuations that made her sound like a radio station fighting interference from hostile solar winds. Attempting emergency repairs with available resources. Ryan watched his partner work on her equipment with growing concern, understanding that the voice modulator was apparently more than just communication technology, it was the primary system maintaining her concealed identity. Without it, whatever secrets she'd been protecting would become immediately obvious to anyone within hearing range. How bad is it? Ryan asked, noting that her armor was also showing stress indicators that suggested broader system failures than just vocal communication problems. Voice modulation system operating at 37% efficiency, Sentinel replied, her words now carrying undertones of what was obviously a feminine voice beneath the electronic distortion. Secondary life support systems showing decreased stability. Primary concern, maintaining operational integrity while addressing critical system failures. Operational integrity meaning keeping your identity concealed? Affirmative, she said, though the electronic masking was now so degraded that Ryan could clearly hear the musical quality of her natural speech patterns. Identity disclosure protocols require controlled circumstances and appropriate preparation. Current situation provides neither. Ryan realized they were facing a choice between her continued concealment and their mutual survival, as her armor's failing systems were creating life support issues that would require direct intervention with technology she'd been using to maintain her disguise. Sentinel, he said carefully, if fixing your equipment requires revealing your identity, I'm okay with that. 3 months of partnership has taught me to trust your judgment, and 18 hours of honest conversation has taught me that I care more about who you are than what you look like. Her armor made sounds like someone adjusting complex machinery while experiencing significant emotional responses. Identity revelation presents risks beyond immediate circumstances, she said, her voice now clearly feminine despite the failing electronic modulation. Human psychological responses to Kithra physiology create complications that may affect our professional relationship and crew dynamics. What kind of complications? Kithra females are often perceived as decorative rather than functional by human personnel, she explained, her failing voice modulator adding crackling distortion to words that carried obvious frustration. Previous assignments resulted in reduced tactical responsibilities and increased social expectations that interfered with operational effectiveness. Ryan understood that her concealment had been motivated by professional necessity rather than personal preference, and that revealing her identity meant risking the tactical partnership they'd built over months of successful collaboration. So you've been pretending to be male to avoid being treated like a decoration instead of a soldier? Pretending to be unspecified, she corrected. Armor and voice modulation allow for tactical competence assessment without prejudicial assumptions about gender capabilities or social roles. Her voice modulator chose that moment to produce a sound like electronic equipment suffering existential crisis, followed by complete silence that left her natural voice unfiltered for the first time since Ryan had known her. Well, she said in a voice that was unmistakably feminine, melodic, and somehow both delicate and strong, I suppose that settles the concealment question. Ryan stared at his partner, hearing her speak without electronic modification and understanding that every assumption he'd made about her identity had been built on incomplete information. Her voice was beautiful in ways that made 3 months of synthesized communication seem like listening to music through broken speakers. Your voice, he said, amazed by the difference between her natural speech and the mechanical tones he'd grown accustomed to. It's completely different from what I expected. Different how? She asked, and Ryan could hear nervousness beneath the musical quality of her words. "Different beautiful," Ryan said honestly. "All this time I've been talking to you through that electronic filter, and now I understand what I've been missing." Her armor's stress indicators showed what appeared to be emotional responses affecting her equipment's functionality. "Aesthetic appreciation may be temporary," she said carefully. "Direct visual observation often produces different responses than auditory impression. Are you worried that seeing you will change how I feel? Previous experience suggests that human responses to Kithra appearance involve objectification that reduces tactical respect," she said, her unfiltered voice carrying years of frustration with human prejudice. "Visual assessment often overrides competence evaluation." Ryan understood that her fears were based on actual experience with human stupidity rather than theoretical concerns about first impressions. "How about this?" he suggested. "What if I promise that seeing you will only add to what I already know about you rather than replacing it?" "Promise parameters unclear," she said, though her voice carried what might have been hope beneath the continued wariness. "I promise that discovering what you look like will just be additional information about someone I already care about, not a replacement for the 3 months of partnership and 18 hours of honest conversation that taught me who you are." Her armor made adjustment sounds that suggested internal debates about risk versus trust, professional security versus personal connection. When she finally responded, her voice carried the determination of someone who had decided to take a calculated risk despite the potential consequences. "Life support failure requires emergency maintenance that will compromise armor integrity," she said, beginning to activate systems that Ryan had never seen her access before. "External assistance may be necessary for critical repairs." "What kind of external assistance?" "The kind that requires removing my helmet and accessing internal life support systems," she said, her voice now carrying obvious nervousness about the implications. "The kind that will make concealment impossible and identity completely obvious." Ryan realized that her equipment failures had created the situation he'd been curious about for months while simultaneously creating the circumstances she'd been trying to avoid. "Are you asking for my help, or warning me about unavoidable complications?" "Both," she said simply. "Life support systems require immediate attention, and you're the only qualified technician available. However, providing assistance will reveal information that may affect our partnership in ways I cannot predict." "Then let's find out together," Ryan said, moving closer to help with equipment that would show him everything she'd been concealing for 3 months. "After all, we've already established that we trust each other with our lives. This is just trusting each other with our assumptions." Her armor began the unsealing process with mechanical sounds that seemed to carry years of anticipation and apprehension. "Ryan," she said, her unfiltered voice carrying his name with affection that had been hidden behind electronic modulation, "my name is Lyralii. And I'm about to show you why I've been wearing this armor for reasons that have nothing to do with tactical advantage." As her helmet began to retract, Ryan felt anticipation mixed with the understanding that whatever he was about to see would change their relationship in ways that would either strengthen their partnership or complicate it beyond repair. "Hello, Lyralii," he said, watching her face emerge from concealment for the first time. "I'm looking forward to finally meeting you." When her helmet fully retracted, Ryan found himself looking at the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, elegant features that combined strength and delicacy, eyes that sparkled with intelligence and humor, and the distinctively pointed ears that marked her as Kithra. But more than her physical beauty, he could see in her expression the personality he'd been falling for through 3 months of partnership: courage, integrity, humor, and the kind of tactical brilliance that made her exceptional at everything she attempted. "Well," Lyralii said, watching his reaction with obvious nervousness, "now you know why I prefer armor that conceals rather than reveals." "Now I know," Ryan agreed, understanding that she was even more remarkable than he'd imagined. "Why anyone who treats you as decoration instead of recognizing your capabilities is an idiot who doesn't deserve to work with someone as exceptional as you are." Her smile transformed her face from merely beautiful to absolutely radiant, and Ryan realized that discovering her identity hadn't changed his feelings, it had simply given them a face that matched the person he'd already fallen for. The rescue team found them 36 hours later, successfully extracted from their underground survival situation and engaged in what appeared to be the galaxy's most tactically sophisticated romantic conversation. Lyralii had remained unmasked during their final day together, allowing Ryan to learn that her face was as expressive and intelligent as her personality, while she discovered that his attraction was based on qualities that had nothing to do with assumptions about gender or species. "Well, this is going to make crew briefings interesting," Captain Martinez observed as their rescue shuttle approached the Meridian, studying reports that indicated their tactical team had survived the underground incident while apparently resolving several months of interpersonal mystery. "Should I be concerned about the effectiveness of our exploration teams, or pleased that our personnel are developing stronger partnerships?" "Both," Ryan said, sitting beside Lyralii as she prepared to face the crew without her identity concealment for the first time in her Starfleet career. "Though I should mention that Lyralii's tactical expertise just became even more impressive now that I understand she's been operating at peak efficiency while managing elaborate identity disguise protocols." Lyralii adjusted her armor systems, which were now configured for comfort and functionality rather than concealment. Without the voice modulator and with her helmet retracted, she looked like what she actually was, a highly competent tactical specialist whose capabilities exceeded most of her colleagues regardless of species or gender. "Crew adjustment protocols may require patience," she said, her natural voice carrying the musical quality that Ryan had fallen in love with during their underground conversations. Human responses to revealed Kithra identity often involve recalibration period during which competence assessment becomes temporarily confused by aesthetic distraction. Translation: People are going to be weirded about discovering that our mysterious armored warrior is actually a beautiful woman. Statistical probability suggests temporary operational complications. Lyralii agreed with humor that her voice modulator had never been able to convey properly. Though previous experience indicates that professional relationships eventually stabilize after initial adjustment period. Their return to the Meridian became an education in crew dynamics as their colleagues processed the revelation that Sentinel, their imposing tactical specialist, was actually Lyralii, a young Kithra woman whose appearance challenged every assumption they'd made about identity and capability. The adjustment period involved several crew members apologizing for months of incorrect pronouns and tactical assessments that had been based on incomplete information. "I have to admit," Chief Engineer Williams said during their first post-revelation briefing, "this explains why your tactical recommendations always seem to account for variables that the rest of us missed. Kithra tactical training is legendary for its comprehensiveness." "Tactical training is universal," Lyralii replied diplomatically. "Species-specific approaches offer different perspectives on problem-solving, but effectiveness depends on application rather than origin." Dr. Sarah Chen from the medical department was more direct in her response. "Lyralii, I'm curious about the psychological effects of maintaining identity concealment for extended periods. Was the armor persona difficult to maintain?" "Identity concealment required constant attention to behavioral modification," Lyralii explained, settling into her chair with the grace that Ryan now realized he'd been seeing all along without recognizing it. Suppressing natural communication patterns while maintaining tactical effectiveness created interesting challenges in personal expression. "What kind of challenges?" Ryan asked, understanding that he was learning about aspects of their partnership that he'd never considered. "For example," Lyralii said with a smile that transformed her face with warmth that her armor had never been able to convey, "humor translation through voice modulation requires careful timing and frequency adjustment to approximate comedic effect. Natural humor expression is significantly more efficient." The crew discovered that Lyralii without concealment was not only more personally engaging but also more tactically effective, as her natural communication style allowed for faster information exchange and more intuitive coordination during complex operations. Her decision to abandon identity concealment improved team dynamics while challenging human assumptions about capability and appearance. "So what happens now?" Captain Martinez asked during their mission debrief. "Do we need to adjust our tactical protocols, or can we assume that our team effectiveness will improve now that communication barriers have been eliminated?" "Team effectiveness should improve significantly," Ryan said, looking at Lyralii with appreciation that had evolved from professional respect to personal affection to something approaching devotion. Though I should mention that our partnership has developed aspects that extend beyond purely professional collaboration. Romantic complications? The captain asked with the resignation of someone whose crew regularly discovered that exploration missions created unexpected interpersonal developments. Romantic solutions, Lyralii corrected with humor that made Ryan understand why he'd been attracted to her personality long before learning about her appearance. Previous identity concealment created barriers to relationship development that have now been resolved through mutual honesty and compatible emotional attachment. They're dating, Dr. Chen translated with amusement. Though I suspect their relationship will be more complex than standard human romantic dynamics. All relationships involving competent individuals are complex, Lyralii observed. Interspecies relationships simply add additional variables to relationship equation-solving processes. Their relationship did indeed prove complex as they navigated the practical challenges of building romantic partnership while maintaining professional effectiveness during exploration missions. Lyralii's decision to reveal her identity had eliminated the barriers of assumption and concealment, but created new opportunities for learning about each other that went far beyond tactical compatibility. You know, Ryan said one evening as they shared dinner in the ship's observation lounge, I keep discovering things about you that make me understand how much I was missing during those 3 months of electronic communication. Such as? Lyralii asked, her natural voice carrying affection that her modulator had never been able to convey properly. Such as the way you think through tactical problems by moving your hands in patterns that matched the spatial relationships you're analyzing, Ryan said, watching her unconsciously demonstrate the gestures he was describing. Such as the way your sense of humor involves linguistic precision that creates multiple layers of meaning. Such as the way you approach problems by finding elegant solutions that accomplish multiple objectives simultaneously. These behaviors were always present, Lyralii pointed out. Observation was limited by concealment barriers rather than behavioral absence. I know, Ryan said, understanding that their relationship was built on foundations that had existed long before her identity revelation. That's what makes it remarkable. I fell for your personality when I thought you were someone completely different, and discovering who you actually are just made everything about you more amazing. Identity revelation typically produces opposite results, Lyralii said with curiosity about their unusual relationship development. Human responses to Kithra appearance often override personality appreciation through aesthetic prioritization. Maybe that's because most humans don't get the chance to fall for the personality first, Ryan suggested. Maybe the problem isn't Kithra appearance, maybe it's human assumptions about what appearance means. 6 months later, Ryan and Lyralii stood in the Meridian's tactical center, working together openly as both professional partners and romantic companions while their effectiveness as an exploration team had become the gold standard for interspecies cooperation throughout their sector. Lyralii's decision to abandon identity concealment had led to improved protocols for Kithra integration into human crews, while Ryan's acceptance had become a model for relationships that transcended species assumptions. Mission parameters established for tomorrow's exploration, Lyralii announced during their briefing, her natural voice carrying the authority and competence that her electronic modulation had never quite captured. Recommended approach. Comprehensive analysis with elevated curiosity protocols. Curiosity protocols? Captain Martinez asked with amusement. Ryan taught me that tactical assessment can be enhanced through aesthetic appreciation, Lyralii explained with humor that made their professional briefing feel like conversation between friends. Beautiful planets remain beautiful even after threat assessment is complete. And sometimes, Ryan added with affection that had grown stronger through months of discovering new aspects of Lyralii's personality, the most beautiful discoveries are the ones hiding behind assumptions that prevent us from seeing what's actually there. Their partnership had become proof that some connections transcended appearance, assumption, and species barriers, creating relationships that were stronger for having been built on genuine understanding rather than superficial attraction. They'd learned that the most profound connections often developed between people willing to look past surface impressions to discover the truth beneath, even when that truth was more amazing than anything they could have imagined.